Hi all, Rob here. Just a little spoiler. Jack Ward will join us halfway through this episode, and Jack had a few mic problems, which get even worse at an oddly appropriate time, which make him sound like kind of what we're discussing, but he really isn't talking to us from the future, it's just microphone problems. We apologize about this, and the majority of the problems do go away after a little bit. So please don't give up on us when you hit the rough patch. Enjoy the episode.
The world has gone insane. Cosplayers rule the conventions. Gamers dominate the tabletop and the internet. Sci-fi subjugates the movies, and fantasy rules the bookstore with an iron fist. Only one group can bring order to this unruly mob. A team of uber geeks, masters of the nerdly arts, trained for decades in the hobby shops and basements of the nation. Mobilized by the secret masters, they are the Department of Nerdly Affairs.
Hello, operatives, and welcome to the Department of Nerdly Affairs. I'm your host, Rob Patterson, here with my co-host, Don Chisholm.
I don't have a routine this week either, but perhaps I will in the future.
Okay, then. All right, so, and tonight, as Don has so hinted at, we are going to be talking about time travel. Specifically, time travel in popular culture. Since we don't currently know any ways to actually time travel. Although by sheer coincidence, the day we're recording this, there was an article in the BBC Online about a physicist who thinks they've got a way to time travel. Which to me sounds like a great way to end up somewhere in empty space and never seen again. which is probably the reason why we've never seen an actual time traveler. And because that's always been my problem with the whole time travel genre is that, yes, you can time travel back in time, but you wouldn't be in the current location. The Earth isn't in the same spot it was back then. And you're not, and even the Earth, even if it was on the Earth is spinning, so you're going to end up in a different spot on the planet unless you can compensate for that too. I mean, the only one I ever saw actually kind of work with that, and I'll give them points for it, was, of course, Doctor Who. Because the TARDIS is what time and relative dimensions in space. Which was their fancy way of saying that the TARDIS moves not through just time, but also space. Unlike H.G. Wells' Time Machine, of course, which, as far as I know, only moved through time, and that would have been a bit of a problem.
Right.
So... Anyway, I'm sorry, I'm jumping off. I'm getting a little ahead of myself here. But since we're talking time travel, there's no harm in mentioning the classics right off the bat, since most people are familiar with Doctor Who and, of course, H.G. Wells' Time Machine, which, thanks to it being public domain, is probably one of the most ripped-off time travel stories of all time. Yeah, pun intended.
You've kind of hit on the big issue, I think, with time travel and popular entertainment. Mm-hmm. It's one of those things, we don't have a real world scientific model for time travel.
For a good reason, yes.
Yeah, it's even what time itself actually is still the realm of like theoretical science.
Right.
But everybody acts like we do have a solid, feasible model of it.
Which is a bit weird, but okay, yeah. I'm not quite sure why we act that way.
Yeah, there's got to be a term for that idea, because there's a lot of different things that I don't think people, even patrons of the nerdly arts, realize aren't real things, but are treated like they are.
Right. Okay.
The best example I can think of is the 3 rules of robotics.
Right.
You know, robots cannot harm a human, blah, blah, blah. That's not a real thing. Asimov made that up for a series of stories.
Yeah, it was a gimmick for a specific series of stories.
But anybody, you always see if they have like sentient robots in something, they always reference those 3 laws like it's something actual, like it's an actual in real life. The people making AIs have written this up and are actually applying it.
And, well, they're trying to, but the problem is that even in Asimov's own story, the 3 laws didn't work. That was kind of one of the points.
Right.
It's like, okay, we're going to build in these 3 laws that, in the story, cause robots to go a little wacky and kill humans. So why would you do that? That doesn't quite work. It's almost like you're guaranteeing you want things to go off the rails, but of course they will anyway.
That's right. Elemental chaos theory teaches that all robots will invariably go mad and turn on their creators.
Is that from Futurama?
Not from The Simpsons.
Right, well, okay, there we go. I knew I heard that one before, yeah.
And this will happen in 14 days, and you see a robot kill a... Oh, sorry, forgot to carry a decimal. 14 minutes.
Right.
It's one of my favorite quotes.
Yeah, there we go. And, well, we can talk about, robot death machines from the future in a minute, but we will get to them eventually. But, yeah, I mean, there are a lot of things that I think that people, I agree with you, have taken to be the quote-unquote laws of time travel, when in fact there are no laws of time travel. It's just so purely theoretical, there are no laws at all.
Yeah. And there's a lot of stuff. We got to come up with a term for that. Because there are a lot of things, like you get the same thing if you look at, we've mentioned before how extraterrestrials work. We don't know. We've never met one. We know very little about the universe, but everybody will act like certain theories about what they would likely be like are a given.
Yeah. Yep. Very true.
And there's a lot of stuff that it's really odd that it will work like this. We do not know, but everybody who writes in a genre that applies to just assumes those things.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, I guess a lot of my knowledge of time travel, this is going to sound weird, comes from, and this is going to sound very weird, but comes from old DC comic books. I grew up reading DC comic books back in the days, and I would read stuff out of the bargain bin, right? So especially the 50s and 60s ones, which are just filled with Superman time traveling or Batman time traveling, and they came up with all their own weird internal logic laws for time travel. And then Marvel Comics did something similar as well. They have their own laws for time travel also.
They do, but they don't come up as much. Case in point, one of the running gags in the old DC Heroes role-playing game was, nope, these are the absolute final rules for time travel again.
Right, so. Exactly. Always going to change. Can't be helped.
Well, that gets to the two, if you talk time travel, there's two broad schools of thought.
Okay, what are they?
That you cannot change the past, and that you can change
the past. Right, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and I guess it just depends on who's writing the story. Duh.
Yeah, it does, and there's other things you can bring in, because what time travel actually is another big variable. Like, we've got kind of one method nowadays that most things use.
Right.
But when you go back historically, time travel was different things. And it's weird that there are different eras where those stories seem to be a little bit popular, and they all tend to glom onto the same kind of idea.
Okay, yeah, I can see that. We can change the history or we can't change the history, but if we can't change history, doesn't that make the story kind of pointless?
It kind of does, because that was where you got the concept of paradox. That sometimes if you go back in time to change the past, you don't change the past because you've already gone back in time and changed the past, so that's part of history, so it can't not be happening. Right, yeah.
This
is going to get weird, but okay, cool.
Yeah, no, I get it. And that every little thing you do is going to change things, so by the continuity you live in, you always did that thing.
Yeah. And that's one of the ways that they that you see a lot of stories, especially if they're like a historical drama, that if you go back, you're not actually changing things because you had already done that.
Yeah, you'd already done it. You just didn't realize it.
Which leads to another weird aspect. If you have a story where you can change the past, nobody would ever know.
That's true, because it was always that way.
Yeah, and it's something, like, I haven't seen that one dealt with too much.
Right.
I think because it sort of almost amounts to, it was all a dream, kind of thing, and people hate that.
Yeah. Well, I generally don't like time travel stories. I did that confession up front. Because they can only end one of those two ways. You either changed history or you didn't change history. I find them kind of pointless. Right. And very often they have an ending where it erases everything that happened, or yes, they changed history, but that was always meant to be, so it didn't really matter, and they never had free will to begin with. So I don't know. For some reason, I find that annoying. Time travel stories come with their own built-in reset button, and that's just something that bugs the hell out of me. I just hate that.
I can see that, because I've only really ever seen one time travel story that kind of made good use of that, and that was Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure.
They did. That's true.
But it was that idea, if you remember, when they're trying to escape from the police station. What do we do? And then they'd find, like, there'd be a note on the wall, quick, duck, and they'd duck. We have to remember to go back and do that.
Yep.
And that's and the second one had the big confrontation at the end where the bad guy had one too. So just all kinds of seemingly random events were affecting the fight because they were both going back in time after they had won.
Yep.
And resetting everything.
Yep. It took Doctor Who like 20 years before he actually tried that stuff.
Well, Doctor Who went from another one of those things that a lot of people consider absolute, is that you can't actually change time, and trying to affect your own timeline creates kind of an infinite loop that destroys the universe. Yeah,
which meant that in Doctor Who, the universe should have been destroyed a long time ago.
In theory, but again, it's another one of those things that it kind of sounds good, and a lot of people accept that that's how it works, but there's all kinds of other ways. There's no reason it has to work like that.
I always found the DC Comics one interesting, where if you go back to a time when you already existed, this was how DC handled it, you were like a ghost. You couldn't interact with anything. Because that was their way to prevent, so Superman, if you went back to a time when he existed, he couldn't do anything. He could just watch events happen, but he couldn't actually affect them or play with them or anything like that. And this was their excuse, of course, to have him go back and see events and whatever. But it was a different way to tell stories, which is fine. That's okay. But oddly enough, I just watched today, there's an anime series that just started called Natsu no Arashi. Okay. Or The Summer of Arashi, as it would be. It's an anime series. It's obviously based on an old manga from the style. And it seems to be about this girl and boy who, if they touch each other, have the ability to go back in time.
Right.
They can actually transport themselves back in time just by, they just hold hands, and they can, it's basically this teenage nerd kid and his crush, basically. And if they hold hands, they can go back in time. But the weirdest part is that they follow the DC rule. If they go back to a time when they were already there or anywhere near their own presence, they turn into a ghost.
Right.
And then the other one who's not there has to actually go do that stuff. But it's only if they get near each other. Near their old... so they can't actually interact with their previous self.
Right.
That's kind of the rule it follows. I just thought that was odd. It's like, hey, they're following the DC rule. Or at least the old DC rule. Again, DC rules change, as you've noted.
Well, a lot of stuff kind of follows that idea, because it comes from that idea that something can't exist in two places at the same time.
Exactly.
And that was where they came up with that notion that if you go back to your own timeline, either you can't do it. A lot of stories will just say you just can't appear in that time. Or, like you say, you can watch, but you can't change things.
Yep. And that's just a very convenient way to prevent you from changing the history.
Yeah, because time travel is kind of like magic in some ways, that it works really good if it's in the service of some bigger allegory. But if it's a thing unto itself, it causes problems. Because like you said, any story that has time travel in it generally can never end, because what's to say we beat the villain and then he just goes back and beats you again, but we go back and beat that guy again, and then... I mean, that's... Have you seen Doctor Strange? The new version, the new movie. The movie? No.
No, okay. So then I won't spoil. There's an element of time travel in that, because he has the Eye of Agamotto involves like the ability to manipulate time.
Right. So
kind of what you're talking about is close to what happens in Doctor Strange.
Okay.
A version of it anyway. So yeah. That's definitely a bit of a problem with time travel stories.
Mhm.
And it's probably been that way since the beginning. I think we should probably go back and talk a little bit about the history of time travel stories, unless there's something
Okay.
else you want to cover.
No, this is another one, and ironically, given the topic, that we're going to have to sort of jump around.
Okay, so this is going to be an asynchronous or a chronological episode. So let's jump back in time to the very, 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 very first time travel story, at least that we know of offhand, and there might be earlier ones.
Hmm.
The earliest one that we know of offhand is Memoirs of the 20th Century, was written by Samuel Madden in 1733.
Well, I'm gonna say that you can go back further.
Okay,
There's two examples of time travel, sort of,
mm-hmm.
that I'm gonna say, and I'm gonna say you can go back to prehistory,
Okay,
likely the earliest days of the human race, and talk about precognition.
okay,
That the idea of telling the future is a type of time travel. It's kind of the DC thing in reverse. It's that
right,
I can project my consciousness, however, and see what's going to happen. I can see the events that will play out.
right, okay,
And I'm gonna that has it puts the idea of time travel out there. There's the caveat that in ancient times, even today, hell, a lot of people think it's really a thing
mm-hmm.
that you can predict the future,
Right.
but it's not something I would say is a scientific certainty.
Yes, let's go with that.
But it puts that idea that we're not entirely fixed in time into the consciousness.
Well, we're not fixed in time, though. We are always moving forward in time.
Well, we are, but again, that idea that we're not just moving forward, that we can kind of jump the line every now and then.
Right. That's true. Although there might be something to that, and I don't mean that in the psychic kind of way, although not to disparage any psychics out there, but there is the ideas that we've been discovering thanks to like quantum entanglement and stuff like that, which is actually a real thing apparently. That you can actually, for example, cause molecules at different places to affect each other and things like that at different points in present time to affect each other. Who's to say that we're not actually in inadvertent ways or however able to affect atoms or even affect things at other points of time on a very small scale that we're not aware of, and maybe some things can go back or forth in time that we're not consciously aware of, but is actually happening.
See, and that gets to that idea that we don't even really know what time is.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up. Yeah, we don't really, not at all.
Yeah, the best explanation I've ever seen was a comedian back in the 80s, and I forget his name.
Mm-hmm.
But he said that time is that which prevents everything from happening all at once.
Kind of, yeah.
And that's pretty much the best definition I've ever heard.
Yeah, time is just something that seems to exist to delineate what and to spread out what is happening, I guess. Yeah. I mean, what exactly is it? We have no idea. I mean, maybe Neil deGrasse Tyson could come on and tell us or something like that. And he's welcome to anytime you want on the show, Neil. Just ask. But or maybe Hawking might have been able to give us a better definition or something. But yeah, what exactly is time? Like, what does it actually mean? And the truth is, it's like gravity. We really just don't know.
Yeah,
we just don't know what this stuff is.
And they've proven, not in a dramatic sense, that time doesn't flow the same for everybody. Sorry. Oh, but it's like how Einstein was saying that the closer you get to the speed of light, time slows down.
Yeah.
And they've shown that. They did experiments with orbiting, and we all stick with that, with orbiting spacecraft and that.
Yes.
That they've put atomic clocks on them, and they've had a similar atomic clock on Earth, and they've discovered, because an orbiting vehicle travels extremely fast.
Yes, it does.
We don't think of it, but remember, you're orbiting the entire planet in like a day or so, so they're moving at just tremendous speeds. And they would come back, and the clock on the spaceship would be a little bit behind the one on Earth.
Yeah.
Not by a dramatic amount, by maybe like a couple thousandths of a second. But it's enough to demonstrate that there might be something to this idea that the faster you go, the slower time moves for you.
Right. Yeah. Which is one of the reasons why, in theory, you might actually be able to have people travel to distant stars. And oh my God, it's Jack Ward talking to us from the future. Well, this is a surprise. All right, welcome to the show, Jack. Welcome back again.
Well, thank you so much. I'm so glad to be included. A little late, but here. So catch me up. You were talking about Star Trek.
Well, yes. We were just talking about how Star Trek uses the warp drive system to get around the whole issue of time travel by basically the warp bubble wraps you in this bubble of space and time that keeps you at a kind of galactic constant time. So that if you travel between planets, it's only the travel time that's involved, and both planets, their local times are effectively still synchronized with each other, and you can move between them without undergoing time dilation effects, thanks to that meanie Einstein who said that you can't travel faster than light, and that things get slower as you get closer to the speed of light.
Yeah, it's Star Trek's version of the Star Wars had its version with hyperspace. It's just sort of like an ultra space that you cut in and out of kind of thing.
Don mentioned that too, yeah. We were just starting to hit the timeline for the different stories of when time travel started to appear in popular culture, because that is our topic today. And Don had brought up that some stories which are about precognition are actually also time travel stories. And there's some fairly old ones.
That's really cool.
I'd say not just the stories, like the idea, going back to our primitive ancestors, that you can mystically see the future, puts that idea of time as not a constant into the heads of the masses.
That's true. So in that sense, the time travel story is almost as old as humankind itself, because we've always had seers. We've always had people that said they could predict the future.
Yeah.
In one form or another. But the actual first time travel story, in terms of someone actually physically going around, as far as we know, is Memoirs of the 20th Century by Samuel Madden in 1733.
Right. Although, I would say that there's one sort of idea in between.
Oh?
And it kind of ties into it. It's where you're starting to approach closer to fiction.
Mm-hmm.
But if you go back to like the Middle Ages, even before, there was the idea of the Fey Folk.
Right, that's true. Oh yeah, and they could pull you out of time.
Yeah, and that's what they would do, that if you joined in their games, or if you took from their food and drink, it shifted you into their world. And there were all stories of people who would go away with the Fae and party for a couple days and come back, and it'd be like 100 years later.
The Rip Van Winkle approach. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which did actually... Rip Van Winkle, of course, is an actual story. Rip Van Winkle itself was written in 1819 by Washington Irving. Although it's very possible that he was actually just basing that, of course, on actual Fey Folk legends of the time. He was just writing it down. Yeah,
there's a catch that you get to. And we were sort of talking about that, how things come in waves.
Right, yeah, that's true.
Because the Memoirs of the 20th Century, you mentioned what the story is. It's a guy's guardian angel who goes to the far-off future of 1997. And he brings back letters to this guy about what happens. There's a couple stories around that time that feature that sort of idea of like a fairy or an angel, or that's either bringing something back or sending people to the future. You get to Rip Van Winkle, and you get to this weird thing that becomes a running theme for a while in time travel, that losing consciousness lets you slip out of the time stream.
Right, yeah, that's true. And we'll see that, or time or space, of course, if we're talking about John Carter of Mars. So, okay, that's true. And that technically would mean that the first one where people slip out of the time stream then would be Rip Van Winkle. Yeah, although technically there is one before there. Jonathan Herming Wessel wrote NO 7603 in 1781, where a good fairy sends people to the year 7603. and they find themselves in a society where gender roles are reversed and only women are soldiers.
Wow.
Yep.
That's another weird running theme of the day too, that you end up in these like future worlds where like women are big and strong and men are like weak and subservient.
Yep.
Very Freudian, years before Freud.
Yeah, well, human consciousness, still Jungian stuff, I'm sure.
So here's a question though, because I think Don brings a really interesting thing. I know of 3 effective science fiction styles of ways of handling time travel, but Don brings in something which is sort of like suggestions of reincarnation in that. So if somebody if for example there's a woman, and I forget her name, but she was just like this average woman who didn't write books or anything like that, but then suddenly had written this book about this other life, way back in the past, the stuff she could have never known, kind of thing. And people were quite fascinated by this tale that she told of this person's life, and she wrote it basically with the skills of this other person's that was supposedly her past life, right? So it was in fact, I forget her name. I remember listening to it on Mysterious Universe and going, that's really interesting. So it was reincarnation really time travel? What is time travel then? If are we talking about physically traveling? Are we talking about mentally traveling? Because one of the things they talk about is, we may be able to see into the future, have some kind of visor that can show us what the future would look like more easily than actually traveling there. Is that time travel?
Well, I'd probably say that, yeah, it's definitely, it's a type.
Right.
That we were talking just before you got in. The modern version of what time travel is kind of comes from H.G. Wells.
Sure.
Because we believe you have a device or an effect or a spell that lets you physically transcend the actual flow of time. But I would definitely...
Yeah, because...
Oh, go ahead.
Because, I was just going to say, because the guy you just mentioned who fell asleep, he just fell asleep.
Rip Van Winkle,
he didn't... Rip Van Winkle, he just fell asleep, thank you. Rip Van Winkle, it's not like he specifically used a device to purposefully move himself through time into the future.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, you can go back and say King Arthur is, effectively a time traveler because he's supposed to be asleep waiting for England's greatest need.
Right.
Maybe Jesus is the first time traveler because he's going to return. But that's a different... Well, no, you could argue it.
Well,
because
the thing
to
is...
be fair, it's no more different transmutation than John Carter. Right? Because he creates a body. He it's an astral projection of some sort that,
Right.
Who's to say?
Well, except for the thing is that, okay, for example, Jesus, he said, going to return. But that doesn't happen within the context of the story itself. A character saying someday I'll return doesn't make that a time travel story. The character, to make it a time travel story, the character would have to actually return during the events of the story. They would have to actually move around within the events of the story. Or
absolutely,
or be able to, I guess, maybe if we want to open to Don's definition, see events that occur at another point in time or whatever during that story, because that's where things get a little wonky, depending on whether you're physically doing it or whether you're quasi-physically doing it, like the John Carter version.
Yeah, because I think what Jack's getting at, it does set up a potential time travel story. But until that chapter is written, it's kind of a not yet time travel story.
Yeah, it has the potential. I mean, people have written King Arthur stories where he wakes up in modern day and hangs out with gangsters and stuff. I mean, okay, that happens. Usually he has romances, but whatever. Anyway, the point is that that people have done that. At that point, it does become a time travel story if you want to count it that way.
Right.
Just the same as Buck Rogers would actually be a time travel story because he goes to sleep in a cave and wakes up in the year 2419.
That's one of the versions. Of course, the 1970s version had a whole different thing.
Yeah, the last of America's deep space probes that went in, and he gets frozen in space and then comes back again.
That's right.
Actually, does he really come back, or did they just find his ship wandering around in the galaxy and they happen to bring it back?
it's the Draconians that find
Yeah.
him first, and they defrost him, kind of thing, and then he comes back, and they're going to use him at some point.
Yeah.
Yeah,
as an
no, it's
agent.
it's interesting when you think about it that the whole the cave thing is stolen. It's taken straight out of John Carter, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because it's the exact same thing. Damn that mind gas. Time traveling mind gas is the best.
What year was John Carter written? Do you know?
26.
1926?
Yeah,
Because
I believe.
Armageddon 2419, which is Buck Rogers, basically, is the original novel version. Because remember, there's the comic strip later on. Is from 1928.
Yeah.
So they had probably. So if that's the case, they had probably read it. They probably just said, "Yeah, that sounds good," and that's what they went with. Keep in mind the idea of falling asleep had been, Mark Twain used it, a Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court in 1889.
Yeah, but he didn't.
Right.
He didn't fall asleep. He got hit in the head.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, right, he did, didn't he? Yeah.
Yeah, one of his uppity
That's right.
workers clocked him with like a monkey wrench or something.
Well, he's technically asleep, sort of.
To be fair, it was serialized in 1912, A Princess of Mars.
Oh, well, there you
but
go.
I think it actually came together later in an actual novel form. But
Right,
that's you're right. No, and the thing is, everybody said very much that at The Princess of Mars, the reason why everybody talks about John Carter is that he literally was the forerunner of all of these kind of thing. Mm-hmm. He was the first sort of sword and sorcery guy, the first guy who did this kind of pulp action story stuff.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that he added this kind of strange time travel bit into it.
Well, it's not.
And I do say strange because it's you got to get your head around it and come on one side or another. And I know this because I'm actually doing the audio drama right now of A Princess of Mars.
Right.
So we had to sit down and say, okay, so what is it going to be? Because because he has a physical body. Is he literally dead on Earth? Is he create his own body? How does that happen? So you have to have a logic behind it.
Right. That makes sense.
And if I may, so these are the three elements that I've found in time travel things where they have to have their own kind of logic.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them is the one you've mentioned before with Star Trek, where they make a change, and it's always been that change then,
Mm-hmm.
right? It totally changes society in that way. Another one is it's kind of like ripples in the water, and so there could be like a break. It could take a little while before time catches up, and even when it does, it's like throwing a stone in a river.
Right.
It's still going to go back to what it's supposed to do. There's just going to be this big change in the middle somewhere.
Right.
So if you were meant to die at this thing, you'll probably die that same way. But that's the thing. And then the third method that I've noticed is you can never change time. What you end up doing is just creating a new fork in the river, so you now have a parallel dimension that you're in.
Right.
Yeah.
So those are the three ways that I've seen time travel utilized.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. They kind of come out of different things, like that idea of like a parallel dimension. That's another one that sort of picks up traction in the 80s, because the idea when like quantum physics and that started taking off, that was one of the hypotheses of it, was that the idea that everything happens somewhere in like time and space and the continuity, even though we're only really aware of one at a time. Because if you remember the latter one, the divergent alternate reality, what used to happen in older stories, like say the 50s, 60s, 70s, when you did that, you would create this other reality that was inevitably where like the evil versions of all of your friends had taken over. And when you'd go back and fix the problem, the timeline would right itself, and that other reality would just sort of disappear.
Yeah.
Right.
And it was, yeah, and it wasn't until later that they because I seem to recall there was some like I think DC Comics that did that, but then everybody thought the evil versions of whoever were so cool they'd bring them back. But you wouldn't get like a big explanation. It would be like, oh, but a little later I did this and now I'm back. Ha ha ha. And when you started getting this alternate realities, alternate worlds, when you saw that hypotheses of everything happens somewhere in the continuum in like the late 70s, early 80s, that's when you really saw that idea of divergent timelines take off.
Right.
the
I can see that.
multiverse.
Well, again, it's
it
actual science slowly influencing, time travel fiction.
Yeah.
Yeah, people are starting. People are like, well, there's always that drive, almost always, to make it quasi realistic.
Right.
Right.
And so what they're constantly doing is they're trying to incorporate real science, so to speak, or realistic sounding science anyway, into the fiction to make it more believable. Because remember, we're working with a silly idea. It's the same reason why every 10 years or decade or whatever, so superhero powers have a new origin.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're radiation, sometimes they're nanotech, sometimes they're gamma rays. It just every 10 years they come up with some new buzzword to describe why superheroes have powers.
True. I actually, just so
and
you could throw
it's
this
just
in,
a new facade to paint on the old truck, so to speak.
Right.
Absolutely. I actually created an audio drama about time travel that sort of uses the whole parallel dimensional kind of thing, and it was called Borrowed Time, and it was slightly tongue in cheek in places, and the main character he was running worked as a salesman for a car place, and his neighbor was an inventor, and so he went over there, and there was like a huge power surge which knocked him out. And then he woke up and he was okay, but he was like a little dizzy in the whole bit. But then he started realizing that every time he went to sleep, that he woke up in a parallel dimension. And the more sleeps he had, it was becoming more and more divergent. So things became really, really, really bizarre. So like his neighbor was suddenly a woman, right? And so he's trying to freak out because he didn't want to go to sleep after a while. He was afraid of all the different things that could happen because at one point he no longer worked where he worked, right? So so it's kind of an interesting idea to sort of play with. And it's funny because I got the idea because I remember going to Second City in Toronto years ago, and they had this great sketch with this guy like ran up and he said, "I'm a time traveler. I've done it. I've gone through time." And they're like, this lady's like, "That's amazing. How'd you do it?" He's like, "Yeah, over here. Let me show you my time capsule." And she walks in, and it's his bedroom, and he goes, "Hey, lay down here. In 8 hours, it's the future." I open my eyes, and the future has happened 8 hours later.
Right. Yeah.
So I thought, how weird would it be that if every time we fell asleep, we did wake up, but our brains are somewhat tuned slightly differently to an entirely different parallel dimension. So we wake up in a parallel world and we have no idea because it's so close to the original one. That would explain why some days are just really crappy and some days are really awesome. It's like I woke up in a really bad dimension.
That we're actually, our consciousness are shifting around among similar alternate dimensions, but his okay, that's a weird idea. Okay, that's pretty cool.
See, and now that's why I take, like you guys have mentioned a couple things, why I say if you're going to talk time travel, you have to talk about the Fey from like medieval times, because you mentioned how in the early, like late 1800s, a lot of these stories had people going into a cave and like passing out or something weird happens. That kind of parallels this idea that the Fey folk would take you to their world, that it was often like a ring or a cave or a tree or something like that. That was the gate to their world. And that idea that losing consciousness, that when we sleep, we enter some kind of other kind of world, other continuum.
Right.
Because there's a really good Robot Chicken segment where they did the first person to ever fall asleep, and it's this caveman. He's like, "Oh, I had a good day of, oh no, what's wrong? What's happening? Am I dying? And he falls over, and then like sun comes, he wakes up. Oh, that wasn't so bad. No. But it illustrates that idea that I think for even today, we don't exactly like. Sleep is almost a weird magical thing because you have these weird dreams, you sort of blink out of reality for a bit, and then you pop up like when you wake up and things may have changed during the night. We don't personally understand exactly what's going on. Like again, going back way to like caveman times, we have evidence that they kind of thought that there was something mystical about it. You've got a lot of cultures that think when you sleep, your dream self does stuff, or that you enter this other world, and that's why dreams mean things.
Right. That makes sense. Well, there is that idea that people see the future in their dreams. That's not exactly new. That's been there a long time.
Yeah, and that's the idea that, like the oracles at Delphi Nat would use special gases that put them in like a semi-conscious stupor, and it's that idea that we have to take ourselves out of normal perception and the normal continuum, but when we do so, all of the universe opens up to us.
Right. Yeah, because we transcend time and space.
Yeah.
It's like the prognostications of Mother Shipton and Nostradamus and stuff like that as well, for those things. Yeah, interesting.
All right, so let's get away from Fey Folk for a little bit and start moving forward through time. See what I did there? Yeah, exactly. So we've mostly been covering the early stuff from the turn of the century. H.G. Wells' The Time Machine kind of set the popular standard in 1895 by it being the first major one where someone actually, well, okay, that's technically not true. H.G. Wells actually did write a book, he wrote a book called The Chronic Argonauts, which is about an inventor taking a time machine through time, taking his assistant on a little trip. So he actually wrote the first inventor time machine story 7 years before he wrote the one that we all know. He kind of he lapped himself, so to speak. So there we go. He borrowed from himself or something. I don't know. Anyway, actually, this is one of the more interesting ones on the list. There's a list I'll put in the show notes of time travel works. In 1904, there was one called The Defense at Duffer's Drift by Ernest Swinton. And this is really interesting. It's actually a military tactics manual, filmed as a series of 6 dreams by Lieutenant Backsight Forethought about the defense of a river crossing in the Boer War. His tactics in the early dreams are disastrous, but Backsight Forethought learns something each time until the final defense is successful, which is actually the story, basically, of the movie that just came out a year or so back with Tom Cruise and Emily Blunt, which is called,
Edge of Tomorrow?
Edge of Tomorrow, yeah, that's it. Edge of Tomorrow.
I love that movie, by the way. It's one of my favorite movies of the year.
Yeah. Which is actually based on a Japanese novel called All You Need Is Kill. But they thought Edge of Tomorrow sounded cooler, or more generic, whatever.
Sure.
All You Need Is Kill is pretty cool. Same story. The key point is that idea that of the character living the same life over and over again through time until they finally get it right.
Sure.
So I thought that was
That's Groundhog's Day too, right?
Groundhog's Day there as well. Yeah.
And Daylight, which I actually really enjoyed, but it was one of those things that was really a short show that could only last as one season.
Why?
Because it was the same kind of thing as Groundhog Day. Did you not know Daylight?
No, I didn't watch Daylight, no.
Oh, well, it was very cool. It was kind of like if you put 24 together with Groundhog's Day. So the main character is a cop. He wakes up beside his loving wife or girlfriend, I forget what it is, and then he is arrested for some sort of drug thing, and he's like, what's going on? And he gets thrown into prison. Then he kind of gets released, and he lives through this horrendous day, and she gets killed. She gets murdered.
Right.
And then when he wakes up again, it happens all over again, and he's got to figure out what happened.
Right. Yeah.
And why. And so every episode is, what if he did this?
Right, yeah.
What if he did that? And it runs down all the options and the thing is, at one point he gets shot, and he wakes up and he's still shot.
Oh.
So there is consequences. It's not like you can throw yourself in front of a train and wake up and you're immortal. No. He could die and be dead at this point. So it was very weird. Like, he woke up and he's like, his girlfriend is like freaking out because there's blood all over the bed because he's bleeding to death. And so one episode, he's just like, we're going in the car and we're leaving right now. And then he tries to avoid everything, and still it doesn't work.
Right.
And so there is an answer. They finish it off to be able to have an answer. I forget what it is, and I wouldn't spoil you anyway. But it was a fun kind of show because it had that sort of 24 edge to it. It was Ty Diggs, who was the main character in it. And really well done. Really well done.
Okay. Wow, that does sound pretty good.
If you like that kind of action adventure thing like I do. So.
Yeah, okay. No, I can totally see that. That was pretty good. So let's see. Going forward in time a little bit. Again, no puns intended. The next story that I'd say there were a number of time travel stories. They were sprinkled through history, but the next one that I would say is most famous is actually 1952's "The Sound of Thunder" by Ray Bradbury.
Right.
Because, of course, that's the one about the guy who goes back and hunts a dinosaur, and by doing that, it causes the whole butterfly effect.
That's right.
When he comes back to the
which
present.
they name as a movie later on, too.
Yeah, exactly. Which
So-
I think does it come from that? Does it actually come from that story?
Yes, it absolutely does come from that story, the butterfly effect. Yeah.
Okay. And so that's 1952. And I think that's considered, again, another seminal moment in time travel stories, because it introduced that whole idea of changing reality and multiple realities and that whole thing right there.
Yeah. I think the last two you mentioned are important because the Defensive Duffer's Drift, I think, is the first time a time traveler can actually affect their own outcomes.
Oh, that's true.
Up until then, they're usually observers. And I think A Sound of Thunder is the first time a time traveler actually affects things. Because you had stories where they'd go back, like I think a Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court.
Right.
He does bring some like modern technology in that, like to that time, but it doesn't catch on. Like we don't have huge historical records of that. We didn't get like firearms, 100 years earlier.
Right.
And I think that's why like A Sound of Thunder is that idea that it's the first time you can really change the future by going the past. You're not just like an observer.
Right. I mean, there were other stories where people went to the past, but at that point they either tried to change it and failed. For example, there's one by L. Sprague de Camp in 1939 called Lest Darkness Fall, which is an archaeologist is transported from Rome in the time of Mussolini to the 6th century and tries to prevent the fall of the Roman Empire. And I haven't read it, but I'm going to guess he probably fails. But maybe, but again, who knows? Maybe Lest Darkness Fall, I assume, is referring to like the Dark Ages and everything. So who knows? But the one was the most influential one was definitely Bradbury's The Sound of Thunder. Heinlein did his own ones. There was one, The Door into Summer by Robert Heinlein. And actually, Asimov did one too, The End of Eternity. Where in 1955, Time Guardians carry out reality changes to minimize human suffering as integrated over the whole story of human history. But again, that's just going forward and kind of jumping around, I think.
Yeah.
I would say that All You Zombies by Heinlein in 1959 was one too, and that's probably the strangest time travel story I've ever read.
Okay.
Okay, what's that one about?
Oh, it's also in a movie form.
Okay.
Have you never heard of it? It's
familiar.
I'm not saying this to be snarky. I have a department head who goes, have you not heard of this? And he's like, no, I haven't. Or I was like, no, I'm just curious that you haven't heard of it. I forget what it's called, but it recently was out as a movie as well. It's not called All You Zombies, but you'll have to check and see what it is. Let me just check. It's called Predestination.
Oh, Predestination. Okay.
Okay.
The film with Ethan Hawke. So the story of All You Zombies is this guy who goes back in time they have ways of going back in time they're trying to find a terrorist.
Okay.
And he ends up going back in time. And what happens is it starts off with a woman, and she meets this guy, and they have like a one night stand, and she's pregnant, and it's like there's a ton of different things, but the thing of it is, and it's so complex. But the truth of the matter is he's his own father, mother, and son.
Okay.
Yeah. So he exists all within himself. So like the woman who gives birth doesn't want the baby, so she leaves it at a door. Which you find out that's the same way that she was left when she was young at the time. So she went back in time and dropped him off at somebody else's door. And then eventually has a sex change and becomes a guy who eventually runs into her later on, has this one-night stand with himself.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, it is the weirdest time travel story I've ever read. And I think just me explaining it, you'd have to agree. It's pretty strange.
Okay.
Not just time travel, but it's also about masturbation.
Pretty much.
Well, they're not masturbating, they're actually having sex. That's the problem.
Yeah.
With himself.
With himself. So isn't that? Yeah, exactly the same way.
Dun, dun, dun!
Wow, that is so messed up.
It's a short story, so go ahead and read it. If you're interested, the movie was in 2014.
Okay. Wow, okay.
So we're up to the 59s. I kind of threw you completely off
Yeah,
there.
and of course, once we get to continue. So once we get to 59, of course, then we're starting to get into other, television. Of course, has popped up by this point, and we're going to get to Doctor Who, which will pop up in 63. So that's not too much later. Mm-hmm. Although it was not the first time travel TV show. The first one was in 1951. It was Captain Zero. Captain Z-R0. Scientist Captain Zero works with his remote laboratory, safeguards mankind in history from impending harm. He has a time machine, the ZX-99, both to view history and send someone back in time when the past has been altered.
Wow.
And of course, in 1959, we had Mr. Peabody and his boy Sherman on the Rocky and Bullwinkle show that also appeared. And so actually, in terms of television, the Doctor Who was actually the third time travel series. At least the third one that's generally listed anyway. There might have been another one in there or some other time travel thing that happened, but that's the third one that's listed.
When did the cartoon mouse Max show up? Who was basically a Canadian? Remember that one?
No.
When we were young, they had a whole bunch of cartoons, and there was a time traveling mouse by the name of Max that would take you back and give you basically history lessons, kind of thing.
I don't
know if he was time traveling or if he just never died, and he was like throughout all those different times.
Okay.
And you don't remember that?
No, not at all.
No, I don't know if you remember that they was it the claymation Pinocchio and the continuing Wizard of Oz cartoon series.
Right.
And on Saturday mornings, they used to have them, and then they would have Max kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I have to admit, I do not know that one at all. Now, are you sure it was Canadian?
I'm assuming it was just because it was really bad animation.
Ooh. Ow. Okay, well...
No, there was a whole bunch, like it was one of those, there was a whole series of cartoons that were really bad animation at the time, to be fair. I mean, the Hulk wasn't much better.
Well,
there was a lot of
a lot of them were 60s cartoons that we were watching in our childhood.
Yeah,
like static pictures, and then they would just change the way the camera like zoomed in on it or something like that. So, yeah. Sorry, keep going, and I'll find it.
Okay, so I jumped to TV just for context at that point. I mean, there are of course, there are also time travel movies that occur around the same time. Actually, time travel movies date back to hold on a sec.
Well, I go back to the 1800s because there's what the hell is it called? The Ghost of... I can't remember.
Oh, the Ghost of Hollow Mountain?
No, not the Ghost of Hollow Mountain. It's the Ghost of Slumber Mountain.
The Ghost of Slumber Mountain. Yes, there it is.
Where the guy falls asleep and he wakes up and this weird little wizard guy has a magnifying telescope that lets him see the past, and they see dinosaurs, and then they get chased by dinosaurs.
Right. Okay.
So I was right. It is a Canadian animated television series. It's called Max the 2,000-Year-Old Mouse.
Oh.
It aired in 1967 and it says 67 and 92. Good grief. No, it could have gone that long. And it was very popular in several parts of the world, notably the United States, where it was syndicated on PBS stations for a long time. But it was a Canadian show. It has 104 episodes, for crying out loud.
Oh my God.
So I sent you a link. So.
I think I remember it, but it got overshadowed by there was another series that was Once Upon a Time Man was the one that as a kid kind of overshadowed the rest of them.
Yes,
right.
That was the French one, the French-Japanese one. It was basically the history of humanity.
Yeah. And then the opening sequence, the very last scene of the opening sequence is all these guys rushing to a rocket ship to escape the Earth before it explodes. And it takes off, and you actually see all the little guys on the launch pad who didn't make it get turned to hamburger.
Yep. Good Canadian children's television.
Well, on top of that, let's not forget the wonderful stories of Professor Kitzel. Do you remember that?
Don't know that.
That was another animated series that sort of was in the same, almost exactly the same as Max, where Professor Kitzel would go through time and teach you about history and stuff like that. So, yeah.
I think there were probably a lot of educational shows that used time travel as the shtick. Hell, that was Doctor Who, right? When Doctor Who was originally supposed to be... It started
off that way.
Yeah, it was an educational series. That's why all his early adventures are all just him traveling to other points in human history and learning about, the Romans or the Vikings or other groups like that. It takes a while before he meets aliens and such.
Well, actually, it doesn't.
Okay.
You're right. The way that they sold it to the BBC was it'll be educational, and then the second series was Doctor Who and the Daleks. And they're like, fuck educational. We need more cyborg death machines. But that's why if you look at the original Doctor, even in the second one, a lot of the episodes are historical.
Right, yes.
And that was because it was supposed to be educational, but they thought, nobody's paying attention anyway. So...
Oh, you're right. Yep. The Daleks was the second, not series, but the second serial that they did was the Daleks. Yep, that's true. And then the fourth was Marco Polo. Then the sixth was the Aztecs.
Yeah,
and
they did the Reign of Terror. The
Reign of Terror was the last serial that they did in the first season. So yeah, there we go. I mean, but in between, of course, we have the Daleks, the Edge of Destruction, the Keys of Marinus, which is obviously which includes things like the Sea of Death and the Velvet Web and the Screaming Jungle. So, okay, which sounds like that's more of an adventure one. And the Sensorites, which again are some science fiction one. So he was definitely jumping around there. And it looks, and then second season had the Romans, and the Crusade, I guess the chase probably wouldn't be. Yeah, it looks like...
No, that was with the Daleks.
That was with the Daleks. So you can see where slowly the amount of historical content kind of slowly goes down as the show goes on, back and forth, kind of. Yeah.
Right. Well, it's expensive to do really effective historical pieces, which is why Voyagers, with a capital exclamation mark, ended up, like we said before, spending most of their time in the 70s and the 80s.
Yeah,
because you can do much better nowadays. But back in the day, like nowadays, Outlander, and they've got all those other shows that they're doing, and they have the budgets and they have the special effects to be able to play with stuff like that. But back in even in the 80s, it's just good. Timeless is the one I was thinking of the last time that is out now, which is sort of like Voyager, isn't it?
I could be. Sure.
I know there is one. I don't remember because I saw like the ads for it, and I'm like, it's this weird kind of pseudo steampunk looking time traveler thing, and that's what I thought. That looks like Voyagers. Yeah,
it's very much that.
Except they have this giant ship thing that they travel, and it's a female history professor and her two male sidekicks who go back in time and basically are trying to stop people from messing up time.
Abigail Spencer is, I think, the actress in that. So yes, or though that's the history professor. That's her name.
Yep.
Okay, cool.
Yep. And so okay, there's that's true. I mean, and so we've got people jumping around. Another interesting take that the Japanese actually did first, at least as far as I've seen it, is there's a show on Netflix called Frequency. I don't know if you've seen that.
Have you seen the movie, which was originally the movie?
There's actually, it goes better than that. It was originally Korean. It was a Korean TV series.
Okay.
My wife used to watch that. Yeah, I believe it was before the movie. I'd have to double check that. Why, the movie you saw was Korean?
No, the movie was out at least, the movie was in 2000.
Oh, wait, then maybe the TV series, the Korean one, comes from that. Because
the TV series comes from the original movie, Frequency. It's the same. In fact, I've seen both. So yeah, they changed it. They changed the characters up somewhat, but it's exactly the same story detail. And the movie is quite well done.
That's right. The Korean one is actually called Signal, but it's basically it's a very similar idea.
When was it done?
Let me double check. Actually, let's see if there. I'm just okay. Hold on a second.
Because this is one of those questions that we were talking about earlier on. Because frequency, they don't physically inhabit different times.
No, they just have
only their voices. They have a CB radio that is able to go through time, a couple of decades, on a very specific frequency per se.
Wasn't that like a Kevin Bacon movie?
No.
Back in like the 80s?
No, I know what you're talking about, though. There is a Kevin Bacon movie that has something similar. It's like Hollow Man or something like that, isn't it?
No, I forget. That's The Invisible Man. It's White Noise.
White Noise. Okay, yeah, that's it, yeah.
Where he can, like, talk to people using the static of the radio or something.
Right. There's a solar flare that happens in frequency, and it throws things off. So what ends up happening is the guy ends up talking to his father 20 years in the past, who's played by Dennis Quaid, and his father dies in a terrible fire. His father's a firefighter, so he convinces his father not to go out and do that. But then, of course, there's the butterfly effect, and his mother ending up getting killed by a serial killer. Right. So he has to try to talk his father through trying to stop the serial killer before he meets up with his mother. And so things get more and more tense because you find that the serial killer is still at large during his time, and now that he's sort of uncovering all this kind of stuff, then he's being attacked at his time as much as his mother's being attacked in the past. Right. So it's kind of interesting. Yeah.
The Korean one is called Signal. It's from 2016. Yeah. And the synopsis is, a mysterious walkie-talkie allows the detective in the year 2000 to communicate with a cold case profiler from 2015. Gotcha. And then the two of them are not only working to solve crimes, but prevent them from ever taking place. However, a long-standing murder case is closer to home than either realizes. So it's basically the same kind of idea. You got two characters at the same time, two characters at different times solving connected crimes basically at those 2 points.
So and it looks like Frequency came first. Yeah, the movie came first.
Yeah,
there you go.
And then the Japanese even remade that was a Korean one, and the Japanese just this year remade it as well.
Gotcha.
Because it was so popular and I loved it. My wife watched the TV series, Signal, and she was really impressed. It was super popular. It's supposed to be really well done too.
Cool.
It actually had one of the highest rated dramas in Korean cable TV history.
Wow.
As well. Which, again, cable TV history, I mean, they do have broadcasts as well. But the key point is it was super, super popular. And so time travel dramas, if done right, can be interesting. There's also another Japanese one that's an anime that's super popular called Steins Gate. And Steins Gate is basically one about these teenagers start receiving text messages, which they quickly realize are from the future. And some people in the future are sending them text messages, which are actually kind of trying to manipulate the events that are happening in the past using these teenagers to change the future. And but the thing is, different characters are receiving different messages from different people in the future with different agendas. I believe that's what it's about. I've never watched it myself. I know it was actually based on a visual novel, which is a kind of like a role-playing game. And then but the anime is supposed to be really, really well done. I should get around to watching that at some point. But yeah, that's from what I understand is the basic premise. It's about guys receiving text messages from the future.
Cool.
All right. So, messages going back and forth from the future is definitely another form of time travel as well. Tying back to what Don was saying earlier. All right. So actually, here's another thought. Why don't we talk about our individual favorite time travel series? Because there's so many in history. You're
right. And can we talk about, and I can start off with one of my recent favorites, but it's a different one as well, because we talked about various different ways. Lately, there's been a lot more of the person. It's not a device, but it's a person who has the ability themselves. So things like The Time Traveler's Wife was very popular about that.
Right.
And one of my favorite movies, and they tend to be dramas, which is really interesting because they focus on the drama of what would your life be like if that was your ability. and
Right.
it's not a good thing, right? Necessarily.
Right.
So one of my favorites, and my father watched it, and he mentioned it to me as well, without me mentioning to him, was About Time.
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen that?
The movie or
The movie.
Okay.
It was in 2013. It starred Rachel McAdams.
Right.
It's the main character, and I forget the main character's, the actor's name. I'll find it in a second. He's been in a number of things recently. Bill Nighy's in it as well. Domhnall Gleeson. And so Domhnall Gleeson, you'll recognize him in the Star Wars movies recently as well. So he's been in a number of different things. So at 21, he discovers that he can travel in time and change what happens in his life. And so he tries to make the world a better place by getting a girlfriend. He just tries basic things or little things. It's not as easy as what he wants. And then he starts to realize that his father, he's gotten this from his father. His father has the same ability as well. And his father's just a regular guy because he found out that the more you messed with time to do things that just to try to make yourself wealthy, to try to make yourself, it just worked out really badly and people died, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's a really interesting twist in it that's not taking too much away from it, but he finds that he can only go back if he goes back in time. Like his wife Rachel McAdams is pregnant. If he goes back in time, then when he goes back to the future, his child is different.
Okay.
So he can't go back in time once he's had a child. He can't go before that child's birth, or that's like a tent post of time, or else he endangers that life of that child because there's 2 billion sperm or whatever, and it's another one that makes the child. So I think he comes back and he had a girl at one point and now he has a boy and he's like, what the hell happened? So it's really fascinating and like I said, a really nice drama. If you're in the mood at some point to sit down and watch it with Connie, I think she'd like it.
Huh. Okay. That would be my wife.
That was on Netflix too. I don't know if it's still there.
Okay. That sounds pretty cool. How about you, Don? What's one of your favorite time travel stories?
I don't know. Like you mentioned Doctor Who, and that's kind of a big one for me. I think one of my favorite time travel segments was the restaurant at the end of the universe from the second Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy book, which was it was Milloway's, this big high class restaurant.
Milloway's.
Their whole shtick was the restaurant's encased in a time bubble. And the big show for dinner is you get to see the end of the universe. You get to see the final destruction of everything. And then after it happens, a few minutes later, this bubble zips you back to like 2 hours to before it happened.
Right, yeah.
And I always got a kick out of that. The one thing that I thought was funny was they had, I forget the name, but it was this religious group who was waiting for the return of their god. And at the one point, the maitre d' is like, well, if he's coming, he better hurry. He's got 14 minutes left. Haha. And then the god shows up and he's got an excuse why he was held up and it wasn't his fault. And it's pretty funny. Right.
That's pretty good. Okay. For me, I'm going to take, one of mine is, of course, Back to the Future. I've always loved that movie. Especially the first one. I mean, taken as a set, all three, they do work pretty well together, especially would be the first and second one, especially because the first and second one are almost perfectly in sync with each other. No pun intended. They literally are in perfect sync with each other. The third one I wasn't that impressed with, but whatever. You know, that I think they went one too many. But the first and second are perfect time travel stories. They really are. I definitely, and I mean, it's Back to the Future. What can you say? It's a classic for a reason.
For sure.
Yep. So how about you, Jack? What's another one of your favorites?
I'm gonna go back to 1980. I'm feeling all dramatic lately. Somewhere in Time with Christopher Reeve and Jane Seymour. I watched that and I cried. It was very emotional for me when I first watched it the first time because I didn't know what it was about. Do you know that story? No,
I don't. Can you tell us?
It's a drama, and Christopher Reeve comes into this old sort of house. And it used to be this grand hotel kind of thing, and now it's like an inn and the whole bit. And he meets this old lady who says, "Come back to me," and she basically dies in front of him. And he's
Right.
like, what are you talking about, kind of thing. And he starts researching that she's been there waiting for many years for somebody. And he goes back and he starts looking at pictures and the whole bit. And he starts talking to some psychologists, like, why would this woman know me, and the whole bit. And the guy kind of argues, he says, well, I got into hypnosis, like, really deeply. And I worked really, really hard once because I wanted to see, how it would mess with my perceptions. And for just a moment, I really slipped back in time. I'm sure I did. So he does this. He gets himself into a room. He wears all the old clothes of the time. He starts thinking of himself in this time and the whole bit. And he somehow appears back in time when Jane Seymour, and they fall in love and the whole bit. And then something happens which basically reminds him of the future. And suddenly he's leaving her in a dark hallway, and he can't get back to her, kind of thing.
Right.
And so that's kind of like, it's like I said, it's very dramatic and sad, timeless love story kind of thing. So between that and Time Bandits, 80 and 81 had
Right.
That was a great one too. So
you were a true child of the 80s, Jack.
yes, there I was.
Yeah, okay. Well, yeah, Time Bandit's another excellent one. Okay, Don, another one?
I think I'm going to have to go with a movie that I'm going to say it's a near miss. In that it's not a good movie, but it's got a lot of neat ideas. It's kind of all there, but they never quite pull it together to make a classic. And that would be Roger Corman's The Undead.
Okay, that I would admit, as usual, you've surprised me with a totally obscure reference. Let's hear it.
The whole point of the movie is it was a research. He's like a parapsychology researcher or something like that. This was like a 50s movie, so he of course studied science, which meant he could rebuild your toaster and build a reactor and understand biology and cure an alien plague and that, because that's what 1950s scientists did.
Of course.
Yeah, and he gets this woman that he uses hypnotism to regress her back through her past lives. And she's a woman of ill repute. She's a prostitute. She's kind of obnoxious. And he finds in this, like, she's in one of her past lives in this, like Dark Ages kind of European village. And she's been accused of being a witch. And she's in love with this guy who's like a knight, and they're trying to find a way to prove her innocent. But she's going to be burnt at the stake. And what happens is this guy gets obsessed with this story. So he goes back in time as well. She's still out. He hypnotizes himself to go back to this time period. He does, because he's wants to find out what happens. And while he's back there, it turns out there really is a witch, and she summoned the devil, and the devil is watching all of this, and he makes a bet with the guy from the future about what's going to happen.
Right. Okay.
And to give away the ending, what ends up happening is this woman from the future, she realizes that if she avoids her death, all of her future selves, all of the people she'll be reincarnated as, won't turn out the same way, and she decides ultimately she can't do that to these other people. So she dies. And when she's executed, it breaks the link, and the scientist guy dies with her. That if I remember correctly, like, he disintegrates into a suit filled with dust in the future, and the other scientist he called in to watch this, like, sees it and doesn't believe it, and then you hear, like, the devil laughing, and that's where it ends.
Huh. Okay. That's pretty impressive.
There's a Mystery Science Theater episode, and I would highly recommend that version. But it's, like I said, it's one of those movies. It's got so many great ideas, but because they probably cranked it out in like 3 days, because it's a Roger Corman film,
right? Yeah,
it really doesn't like solidify quite, but it's entertaining, and like I say, it's there's a lot of cool stuff going on there.
Okay, that's okay. That's pretty cool. Okay, all right. I think I mentioned another show. One of my other favorites was a TV series called 7 Days, which I really enjoyed. Back on one of the alternate cable networks back in the 90s, I guess it would have been. I think it was on the TPN, the Paramount Network, whatever was showing Voyager. I think if I remember right, I think it was like on next to Voyager or something. But whatever, it was better than Voyager overall. But it was the action series about where something horrible would happen, and they had a time machine that could send this dude back in time 7 days. And so he would be sent back in time, and then he would contact the organization that he worked for and say, "I'm here. Here's what's going to happen. Help me stop it." And so, and there was like 3 or 4 seasons of this, and every episode that was the formula. It was just about him going back in time, and it was an action series about him trying to prevent something horrible that's going to happen. It was, again, just an action series now, but it was fun, and then they did a lot of little interesting twists with it. And they even explain eventually how they have time travel technology, but I'll spoil it anyway. The answer is the Roswell machine. It's actually because Roswell was, of course, a big thing back in the 90s at that point.
Of course.
They were using the part of the technology they got from the Roswell UFO crash because they discovered to send him back through time. But again, they could only do it for 7 days.
Cool.
I'm sure you can find it online someplace anyway. How about you, Jack? Another favorite for time travel stories?
Well, I'll give you a favorite and a terrible one. So there you go. Journeyman. I should have been on my list of shows that we should have more seasons of. I really like Journeyman. I don't know if that was starred Kevin McKidd as a San Francisco reporter who involuntarily travels through time. So it was very cool because they called it like it was actually called The Journeyman. They actually made sorry, I was going to say it's related to the adventure game, but it's not related to the adventure game called The Journeyman Project. But it was a very cool show, and it didn't last very long. Suffered from slow ratings. It would have been one of those things that if they had more time, it was 2007, I think I said. So I enjoyed that. A terrible one that I enjoyed as a kid, but it also ripped my soul apart a bit, was based on a book that we didn't mention, classic about time travel. Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court by Mark Twain.
Yes. Oh.
So, I don't know if you remember this, but in 79 they made...
Actually, Jack, we mentioned it before you showed up.
Oh, there you go. Okay, fair enough. That's good. Unidentified Flying Oddball. Did you mention that?
No, we didn't.
No.
Do you remember that one, Don?
Yes, I do.
It's a 1979 show from Walt Disney. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's basically the Connecticut Yankee.
That's right.
Except
but it's a
he's an astronaut.
NASA astronaut.
Did he have an android in that?
Oh, God, I can't remember.
Because I think I saw that thing in the theater as a kid. My parents used to take me to see all the Disney movies back in like the 70s and such. And so I'm pretty sure I actually saw that as a kid, but I don't really remember much of it.
I only saw it on television. I remember like being really crestfallen because he just sort of scienced out how to pull Excalibur out of the stone. And I went, no way. So it's like, I always thought that it was a magnetic thing. And if I just moved it like this, I'd pull it out. Like, stop it. Just stop it right now. Sorry.
That's okay.
Even as a kid, that bothered me. But I think you're right.
Okay.
Didn't he have some sort of android thing that he brought along with him?
Yeah, I thought that because it was supposed to be that they were testing the android.
It was Hermes.
Yeah,
that's the name of the android, Hermes. Yeah.
Because Disney did 2 sci-fi movies around that time that I remembered as a kid. There was that, and there was The Cat from Outer Space.
I remember that too. I saw that in theaters too. I think I saw that at the drive-in.
Well, to be fair, The Black Hole must have come out around there too.
Yeah, it was. I think those were like 76, 77.
Yeah.
And then The Black Hole was like 79.
Well, actually, Unidentified Flying Oddball was 79, apparently. So,
was it? Oh,
yeah,
okay.
I got it up here right now. Dennis Dugan is the NASA employee, Tom Trimble, who unintentionally travels back in time with a lookalike android Hermes. There you go. And remember, like, the evil person is, of course, Sir Modred and Merlin, trying to oust King Arthur from his throne. He's just like, anyway.
Okay, very cool. Dawn, and any others that you can remember or that you'd like to talk about?
I can think of 2 other time travel stuff. One is a story. Is The Shadow Out of Time by H.P. Lovecraft.
Oh, okay, there we go. Classic, yeah.
Yeah, because that was with the great race of Yith, which are those, they look kind of like a giant cone with 4 tentacles coming off the top. And the idea is that they have time travel, but what they do is they project their consciousness into bodies in the future.
Mm-hmm.
And the story is told from the point of a guy that one of them had traded with, and everybody in our time thought he had gone nuts and had him committed. But his consciousness went back in time to the city of the great race, where he found out how it all worked, and he found out what all the different futures were going to be in that. And then when he gets put back in his body, everybody, of course, thinks he had like a psychotic break, and this was all this stuff he's talking about, like giant aliens, and that is just part of his delusion.
Right.
That's kind of like Travelers a bit, isn't it? The show that they have on now, where they have to go back and they like inhabit somebody else's body in the past because they can't send their own body, so they send their consciousness back, and basically they kill. What happens is you'll see like a little time thing like they have for 24, where somebody's about to die in like 5 seconds, and at the moment that person dies, they go into that person's body and take it over. Right. So they don't kill the person's consciousness; they're already dead. And then they take over that person's life. And the idea is they had to go back in time because human beings have just destroyed the Earth in the future. So they have to do all sorts of kinds of things to try to change time to be able to make sure Earth doesn't get destroyed. But you'd think if he did that, then they wouldn't have the technology, and then they'd be in the loop. But I don't know. I know it's very popular.
In Travelers, is it about are the main characters travelers, or are they people trying to stop them?
They are the travelers themselves.
They are the travelers themselves. Okay.
Yeah, so it's really a story about them. It stars the guy who plays Will in Will and Grace. It's a Canadian show as well.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I didn't know that. I know that there was a series. There was a 12 Monkeys series also, which I think was something like that, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Very similar kind of story. Yeah.
Seriously, and that was on. I think it just finished on Sci-Fi. It was actually quite popular. I never got around to watching it, but supposedly. As I mentioned at the beginning, Jack wasn't here for this. I, at some point, got kind of burnt out on time travel stories a long time ago, so I don't generally watch them.
So you never saw the original Bruce Willis 12 Monkeys?
I actually I never did.
Oh, it's the best. It's really quite well done because it's done. It's famously done by the same guy who did the Fisher King and all those kind of Terry Gilliam. Thank you. All those weird kind of movies. So
yeah, no, I would. I mean, there's only a limited handful of time travel stories that I've been fond of. Oh, of course, Quantum Leap would be one of my favorites as well.
Right.
Except for the end. Screw you, NBC. Screw you hard.
That's a terrible ending, wasn't it?
Yeah. Hey, sorry to spoil it, folks. It's an amazing series, but I don't know what they were thinking. I'm still mad after all these years, and I know a lot of people are over the way that story ends.
I know. I showed it to my sons. Both Aiden and Colum have gone through it with me. And at the end, they're like, "No, there's got to be more than this." Nope, that's the way they ended. That sucks. I said, "Yeah, that's a great way of putting it."
It's. I can only imagine that they were doing the typical thing of that period where they thought, well, if we have him actually just get back home and everything officially, then A, we can't make more episodes later on, and B, it will ruin the whole syndication value or something like that. The idea is it's meant to be an infinite loop, basically.
Right.
And that was their intent, but it's because Quantum Leap is such a great series. It really is.
Yeah, it is.
Scott Bakula did such a great job.
Again, you're surprising me, Rob, because you do like Legends of Tomorrow, and that's another time travel show.
I'm lukewarm on Legends of Tomorrow.
Because you've mentioned it a number of times. So that's
I watch it off and on. It is... I would admit, it's when I watch it, it's kind of a guilty pleasure type thing, because it is so crazy, but yet it's some kind of... it's kind of like Doctor Who taken to the next level in a weird sort of way. Yeah, and
Doctor Who meets Justice League or something.
Yeah, just because I think that was probably their pitch.
Yeah,
with the whole thing was basically it's like a time traveling superhero team. It's like, okay, well that's an interesting idea. Okay, why not? And now but they play really, really fast and loose with everything in Legends of Tomorrow. Boy, do they ever!
Absolutely.
Everything is played for entertainment value in that, so not always for the worst. I mean, they do definitely do not take themselves seriously, and I give them points for that actually.
Cool.
For better and worse. But yeah, so I just want to bring up Quantum Leap as well. Don't want to miss that. So, Don, any others that you think is worth mentioning?
Yeah, I got one. I want to say, though, like, Quantum Leap had one thing that bothered the hell out of me.
Mm-hmm.
That it implies that everything that ever happened in human history is one guy.
It almost comes down to that, doesn't it?
Yeah, like, it's the, you are the chosen one to the nth degree, and that always kind of drives me nuts.
Because if he never ever gets home, in theory, he could be everyone.
Yeah.
That is true.
Well, remember there was an evil one too. There was a woman who, got pulled in by the evil side, and they never really did a whole lot with that, but maybe there's multiple of them.
Yeah, because didn't they imply that the idea was that God wanted him to, like, jump around, and that was... And then, like I say, so that makes it even worse. So not only are we all, like, is our future apparently predestined, it's one guy! You know, the rest of us are barely NPCs in the universe.
That's one interpretation of it. Okay.
Oh, that shit makes me so mad. Oh, I hate that.
Okay, this is one of those situations where, you're just taking it too seriously. But he wasn't everyone, just many people into history.
All you zombies.
All you zombies, yeah, that's true. And to the nth degree, everyone is actually everyone's children and parents and grandchildren and everything. Yeah.
There was a good Robot Chicken Quantum Leap episode.
Was there? I didn't see that one.
Yeah, where he ends up in like a prostitute in the 1960s. And they just show a scene with his partner there that only he could see. Work the shaft, Sam! Work the shaft!
Oh, boy.
Oh, that's okay then. All right.
Now we just jumped up to restricted on our list here. Slap that on there.
Well, there's not a lot of, that's one of those things that I'm surprised no one has done. Like, I'm surprised that no one, like, for example, did like a series of porn movies about people going back in time and having sex with historical figures. I mean, has no one done that? Maybe they have. I don't watch enough porn, maybe, or something. But
I'm sure if you go around, you're going to find something at some point. If not, there is somebody listening going, "That's a $1,000 idea right there."
Now, there you go, folks. You can use that one if you want. Yeah, there we go. Jumping around and having sex with as many historical figures as you can. I mean, was Albert Einstein really as good in the sack as people claim? Let's find out.
And that kind of loops back around to one of the things that pops up way too often on the show.
Right.
Dinosaur porn.
Oh, yes. If you want to go back and watch dinosaurs having sex, go ahead.
There's or have sex with them accordingly. So
which I imagine is what happens in dinosaur porn stories. So
that's right. Now, to bring it back to the PG level, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that there are a ton of Twilight Zones, original, and a couple of others that deal with time travel as well that I really quite enjoyed. So
okay, so what are some of the better time travel Twilight Zone episodes, Jack?
Definitely Walking Distance is one of the number one. It's a beautifully done story. Again, another little drama, quite cool. But a guy whose car breaks down just before he gets back to his hometown. He's been running himself ragged. He walks into the hometown, and when he walks in, he walks back to his past. And he doesn't realize it at first, but he tries to get a soda, and the guy says, "Yeah, it's just a nickel." He's like, "A nickel? You're never going to make any money on that." And then he sees himself playing, and he goes back to his own house, talks to his mom and dad, who are now dead, and they don't believe who he is at first. And then he tries to chase after himself on a carousel, and the kid falls off and breaks his leg, and now he's lame for the rest of his life. And so his father comes up and says, "You dropped your wallet." And he goes, "It was really that bad?" And he goes, "I just want to tell him that this is the best time of your life, and just to enjoy it," kind of thing. And it's actually a really special one for Rod Serling too, because it says a lot about his childhood and his past, and the fact that he loved being like a really popular guy, but he desperately wanted to go back into this beautiful past that he could never go back to.
Right.
The Odyssey of Flight 33 is a fun one where a plane gets thrown back in time and they can't land, and they find that there's like dinosaurs down below, which is kind of creepy. Of late, I think of Cliffordville is another very similar kind of one, like Walking Distance, where they set it up. The Execution is a really cool one. They actually have Professor from Gilligan's Island, and he creates a time-traveling device and actually pulls somebody from the past out of a noose And the guy is being hung because he's an awful person. He ends up killing the professor, tries to go back to goes through the 20th century and gets himself killed in the 20th century, where a crook comes into the professor's office, puts himself, try to steal stuff, ends up in the machine, and puts himself into the noose. So sort of like this universal justice takes place no matter what time you're in, is the idea. So it's kind of fun. And then they had one that was very weird. I can't remember what it was called. I think it was Once Upon a Time, or No Time Like the Past. I get them kind of confused. But it actually, it was a very bizarre one where they actually brought in, really famous silent movie
I can't
actor.
remember.
And you know who I'm talking about, though, right?
He was in
the General,
wasn't he?
Buster Keaton.
Buster
Keaton, and he's an older man now. And the weird thing is when they brought him, like they show any of the clips of him back in time, it's as if it's a silent movie. So nobody talks in the whole bit, and then he comes into the future and he's like stunned that he can talk, right? And it's the whole bit, and it just never quite works, but it's kind of fun in a various way. They have Shadow Play as a time travel one, but it's not. I don't know why that's in that list. Shadow Play is about a dream that never ends, so which is kind of creepy. So, but anyways, yeah, those are some of the really good ones. So
you missed the best.
Which one's the best?
The best time travel episode of the original Twilight Zone was The Incredible World of Horace Ford.
Tell me about that one. I've forgotten that one.
It's one of the it's now there's something I want to bring up about these afterwards, but it's the one where the guy is a toy designer and he's all like fed up and he thinks life sucks, and he goes back to his old like street where he used to live, and all the old kids that were there are still there, and it's just like when he was a kid.
Right.
And he gets obsessed and he goes back, and eventually, because that was the best time of his life, and he goes back and he turns into like the kid version of himself.
Right.
And that's where you find out he was kind of a dick when he was a kid, and everybody hated him and they beat the shit out of him.
Right.
And his wife comes looking, and she finds him as an adult, and he's all like mangled because like the neighborhood kids beat the shit out of him when he was a little kid.
And that's written by Reginald Rose, who was one of the top television writers at the time, so that's not a surprise. Sorry, go ahead.
But what I find interesting, especially when you compare it to nowadays, is when you look at all of these the time travel Twilight Zone episodes, they're all anti-nostalgia. And at that time there was a fair amount of that, not just with the Twilight Zone. This idea that no, your past really wasn't as great as it was. Wake up and look to the future. And it's funny to see that, considering for how many years, like nowadays, it's all about the past was better and the new whatever sucks and you're raping my childhood and things were so much awesomer before and like,
Okay.
Because you see that everywhere. Like I say, you see that especially entertainment. You see that with politics. You see that with like even sociology and this idea that for some reason the past was this wonderful magical time. We've talked about it before, how everybody is now nostalgic for their childhoods, which was the 70s, which is one of the worst times in human history.
Okay.
Any time that has Battlestar Galactica can't be a bad time.
Well,
he's got a point on.
The early 2000s had Battlestar Galactica.
No, the original Battlestar Galactica.
I like how you quickly... No, not that.
No.
The 1980s had Battlestar Galactica.
No, it didn't. It had Galactica 1980, and that's all we're going to call it.
Yeah, that's all that existed. There were none before it.
There were none
That's
before.
the way it is. Anyway, okay, so I think we've covered that. Anyone else? I mean, let's see. Other, of course, great time travel stories. There's an interesting one. I mean, there are, of course, stories like The Terminator, for example, where someone comes from another time to our time.
Right.
I mean, is that technically a time travel story? Because if the main characters don't travel, but other characters from that time pop up into our time, is that a time travel story?
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
I would say yes, because they're in that they're trying to change the future. So the main characters are still actively involved in changing time. So if you're actively involved in time in one way or another, it's a time travel show.
Oh, that's a good point. Okay, valid point. They are trying, in the Terminator stories, they are trying to change the future.
That's right.
For better or for worse. Okay, so Terminator definitely counts. All right, any others that we want to discuss?
Well, Terminator, I think, is interesting, too, because the original is a really nifty film. I'm not real excited about anything after.
Mm-hmm.
But what makes the original interesting is the movie is over before it begins.
That's true.
Like, the humans have won, and the whole point was that Skynet sends the Terminator back as its last-ditch effort to prevent the future from happening.
Yeah.
And like I say, but it's lost. The war is over right when the movie begins, and I thought that was kind of an interesting twist and an interesting idea tying into that. Can you actually change the future by changing the past, or do you just follow the established timeline?
This was kind of an interesting aspect that they tried to do in the first and second movie, where the idea was, and by the time you get to the third movie, it was so depressing because they said, no, you can never change it. Where the whole idea in the second movie was, yes, the future is not written. And so it left you with a hopeful moment. And you might argue that, like, the main character was Sarah Connors, right?
Yes.
That everything really focused around her for all the movies, even though she's not the main character in all the movies. But any movie that she's in, and even the television series that she's in, it all focuses on the changes of that she can make in the future. Often by, giving birth to the savior of the human race in that way.
Right.
So that's what I found depressing about watching Terminator as time went by, because if they left it at the end of 2, then you still had this feeling like you weren't stuck.
Right.
But after that, then it's just like, what's the point? What are you really fighting against if it's already written and there's nothing you can do?
Yeah, depending which end of 2 you deal with. Because I didn't like the second movie at all.
Okay.
Just because, again, it was that idea. The first one told a really interesting, self-contained story, and then the second was, but then a little later on, we found out Skynet had another Terminator, so we sent another guy back. And you're like, well, at this point, why aren't you just fucking littering history with tons of these? Like I said, just, dear Skynet, don't send bodybuilders and fashion models. Like I say, an old guy and a German Shepherd. Send them back to the 1920s. Congratulations, you win. And it goes to that problem with time travels. Once you establish that time travel is a thing in your story, nothing matters anymore, because you can always retcon everything whenever you need, just to drag the fucking story out for another 8 movies, 2 comic book series, and a television show.
Right, which is what they do. I mean, again, milking it, although I think it's pretty dead. I think they beat it to death, basically.
Unless again, you're doing the butterfly effect thing, right? And so whatever changes you make are just going to make things worse, right? There was another movie that I didn't see on this list. Was it called Time Lapse?
I don't know that one. Okay.
And again, it was one I saw on Netflix that I didn't get, which was really interesting because it was and it wasn't on the Twilight Zone list. Yeah, it is called Time Lapse. There you go, 2014. And it's so I swear it was from a Twilight Zone show. Twilight Zone movie was called The Most Unusual Camera, where actually they took a picture, and every time they took a picture, like 5 minutes later, whatever the picture showed would come true.
Oh, okay.
So the people who get it in the first part are these sort of bumbling crooks who find it in a curio shop, and they rob the curio shop, and they go, well, let's give it to science. What do we ever do? We need to do something for humankind. And then they notice on the TV, that there's going to be like the racehorses tomorrow, and they're like, we could make a lot of money with this. And the guy says, what about humankind? He goes, what do they ever do for us? Right? and so then they make money, but they find out there's only so many pictures available.
Right.
And so then there's like, they get in real trouble because they have like 3 left. And there's like, well, what do we do with it? And I don't want to spoil you, but because it's kind of a funny show. So Time Lapse, the movie, was similar kind of situation where you have 3 people living together. One of them is, they're in kind of like, sort of like a bunch of homes, sort of like a motel setup, right? With a whole bunch of people living in this massive sort of sprawling motel. And the one guy who's been working as the maintenance guy for this place, and they find out that this right across from them is this scientist who dies, and he has this huge projector-like camera, which is like literally as tall as the ceiling, goes out. It's like 8 tons. Like, it is a massive projector, and it's faced through his window onto their window. And every day at the same time, it takes a picture and shows them exactly what's going to happen 24 hours in the future through their window.
Okay.
And so stuff goes really messed up. Like, they at one point they find out they have, like, money, and like, where's that coming from? Why am I hanging out with money? And so once they know that there's going to something happen in the future, they decide that they're going to hang out there to send messages back to each other into the past, right? To change things too. So it's a pretty cool thing. It was on Netflix. Check it out.
Okay. Yeah, sounds good.
Time lapse.
Time lapse. Okay. Definitely we'll put a link to the IMDb listing for it in the show notes.
Poor Rob. We make him work so hard.
Well, I only do half the work. Dawn is the one who actually hyperlinks them all. I just have to write them down.
Oh, okay. That's good. Poor Don. He does all this work.
He's the one who actually has to go find hyperlinks for everything. So, well, I do a little bit of it sometimes, but that's Don's contribution, and I greatly appreciate it.
There you go.
It makes things a little faster. So on that note, I think it's time to bring this episode to a close. Thank you very much. Try the veal. So, Don, do you have any final thoughts about time travel before we stop today?
I think we discovered something interesting here.
That we can't talk coherently about time travel?
No, that if you mention Star Trek 3 times, Jack Ward shows up.
Oh, well, yes, that is true. It does. It's like Beetlejuice.
That's right.
Anything else interesting that we found, Don?
I think again, it's that idea that, and we've got a big, wide variety of examples of time travel. It's like we were saying at the beginning. This is one of those things that people feel there's established, proper, this is how it works kind of notation to, but there actually isn't. And again, time travel is one of those things. You can use it for a lot of stuff. It can be good or bad depending on how you're using it. It can be completely misused. It can lead to all kinds of weird sort of things. And it's another thing that I think, at least for now, bridges that gap between science fiction and fantasy.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. We perceive it as science fiction, but for the most part, I'd say it's still just fantasy.
Yeah, that was one thing that always drove me crazy with a friend of mine, because he used to hate time travel movies because that's not how time travel works. And I went, what do you mean that's not how it doesn't happen? What are you talking about? But he was so adamant that he knew exactly how time travel worked, and he hated that movies always ruined it. I'm like, what are you talking about? It is fantasy, at this point at least, as far as we know.
Yeah, exactly. Although, as I was mentioning to Don earlier, there is an article on BBC News, bbc.com. We can build a real time machine. Traveling in time might sound like a flight of fantasy, but some physicists think it might be really possible. BBC Horizon looked at some of the most promising ideas for turning the staple of science fiction into reality. And there's this guy named Ron Millett. This will probably be on Mysterious Universe this week or something like that.
Cool.
But apparently he thinks he might have figured out a way to actually build a time machine. He's actually like a professor of physics.
So him from the future will come back and kill him. You know that.
Yeah. Basically, he wants. I think according to this, he wants to use a wormhole. He basically thinks wormholes might possibly go through time, and so he thinks that you could possibly do that. But of course, the problem is, as soon as you start doing that, we'd never know, because of course he would probably change time, or it just doesn't work and he gets squished during the process. There's also that.
And in real life, we don't know what a wormhole is, or even if they are.
Well, they're theoretical, but as we mentioned earlier, they're supposed to exist. We're pretty sure that they exist, but we're not 100% sure how to control them or use them. So that is a bit of an issue. But yeah, so time travel. I guess, I said earlier that I don't like time travel stories. I guess I don't like bad ones. I mean, I like good ones like anyone else, but they're so easy to do poorly. And I also think that time travel very often just ends up being a gimmick that is self-defeating at the end. A lot of times it's like, well, why didn't they just do this instead? Then they could have just solved the problem right away.
Oh, Triangle. The movie Triangle. That's what that reminded me of, too. You'll have to check that one out. The same kind of thing where it's very frustrating, but it's well done to a certain degree, but it is one of those cyclical things which drives you crazy, right? So
Exactly. And those kinds of stories, I mean, I guess some people do like them, but for the most part, I find time travel stories just really annoying unless they're done well.
Right.
I mean, even we talked about Edge of Tomorrow, All You Need Is Kill earlier, Tom Cruise and Emily Blunt, where he's living the same day over and over and over again, the Groundhog Effect, basically.
Right.
Which, once you realize that, I thought about it earlier, it's like, it kind of takes some of the edge off the whole thing. Because especially in that movie, where he can't really die, we're just watching someone try endlessly until they finally do succeed.
It's not fun getting killed, though.
It's definitely not fun getting killed over and over again. That absolutely is true.
You can see that in the movie. He's like, no, boom. And they just keep shooting him.
True. Dying horribly again and again and again does kind of suck. Okay, I think that's probably an excellent note to end our time travel episode on. Oh, I'm sorry, Jack. I didn't give you the chance. Is there anything you wanted to say before we went?
Well, I just want to say that you just gave me a really good idea where a time traveler like Tom Cruise from Edge of Tomorrow ends up in the psychiatrist's office to try to explain all of his psychological scars. It takes him 6 months to just go through like the first 1,000 years of days that he had to do.
Right.
You could have fun with it. Thank you so much again for including me. This is always fun, guys.
No. We're glad that you were able to drop by. We'll definitely have to summon you again at some point in the future to talk about another awesome subject. And hopefully you listeners will also summon us through the podcatcher of your choice and listen to us again in 2 weeks. Until then, good night, God bless, good luck, and may all your futures be good ones.
Again and again.
Good night, folks. Bye. Thanks for listening to the show. If you'd like to hear more or join the conversation, come visit us at obeythedna.com. You can also find us on iTunes or whatever fine podcast site forgot to lock their back door. So until next time, remember that to master the nerdly arts takes time, practice, and enough Coca-Cola to drop a rhino. See ya!